Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today, we're talking winter jig fishing. Winter jig fishing is one of the most rewarding bites that you can get on. You know, so often in the wintertime, we're out on the water, it sounded like a good idea, right? And then you get out there, you haven't been bit for a while, you're freezing cold, you're wondering what you were thinking, and then that jig goes dong. When they hit a jig in the wintertime, so often they hit it like a freight train. And there is just nothing else like it. You go from 0 to 100 in that instant. You're half asleep, you're half frozen, and then you are wide awake and doing battle in the blink of an eye. If you've never experienced a winter jig bite, you are missing one of the coolest patterns in all of bass fishing. It is just such a rewarding way to catch them. Now, there are some people where a jig in the wintertime is just pure confidence. I'm one of those people. The second I pick up that jig rod, I just know fish are coming in the boat. But for other people, it's a mystery. It just completely stumps them. They're afraid of it. They've been disappointed by it. They just can't seem to put together the jig bite. They hear about people catching big ones on a jig in the wintertime. They've just never experienced it. I get it. I really do. Today, I'm gonna make it as simple as I possibly can. This is the most simplified winter jig video that we have ever done. There are only 5 jigs in this video, total, okay? I'm gonna make it as simple as possible so you just can't mess it up. And you don't even need all 5. You need maybe 3 total to get you through the entire winter. It's that simple. The thing about a winter jig bite, one, you've got to know where the fish are, right? So you want to fish likely places, because the only downside of fishing a jig is that you can't really fish quickly. This is bottom contact. We're typically either going to be slow dragging the jig or just barely bumping the jig and then letting it sit. Bump, let it sit, bump, let it sit. And then again, the alternative is just that slow pull. Just grinding along the bottom, just bumping into everything. So we're not covering tons of water. So if you've been out fishing, you've caught fish on other things, you sort of identified some areas that there are fish, that's an excellent start. If you haven't done that, then what I would recommend is fishing your most likely locations, the places that are most likely to have numbers of fish all winter. We've already covered that in Where Do Bass Go in the Winter, right? We've already covered that topic. So you'll want to reference that video if you haven't already seen it. And I'll link it in the video description for you to take you back to that. But you want to fish those high percentage areas, right? You want to fish those pinch points. You want to fish ends of main lake points. Things like that where those fish will stack up. But once we've ID'd those spots, we have some general places on your lake you're going to go, and that's whether you're in a boat and you can run around or you're on the bank and you've got to drive to them. It does not matter. After that, we're going to focus in on the jigs themselves. The biggest thing I want you to understand about jigs in the wintertime is that you can keep it very, very simple. I only use a couple of head shapes. Primarily, I only use one, but there's an exception to that, and we're about to talk about that. Other than that, I'm super simple with my colors. My jig colors, I'm typically going to use a brown and purple, a green pumpkin, or a green pumpkin orange, or some blend thereof, okay? So essentially you got green pumpkin, orange, and purple. That's it. The other thing that's really fun this time of year is you don't need your jig skirt color and your trailer color to match at all. So once you understand that, confidence can go through the roof, because a lot of the details, the worry that you don't have the right jig trailer, the right this, the right that, you can throw all that out the window. okay? We can mix and match colors of jigs and colors of trailers to get us in the right color palette for a given day. So let's talk about the specific jigs. We'll talk more about color as we go. We'll talk jigs and we'll talk trailers. Essentially, the jigs are going to be broken down into 3 categories. That's a full-size jig, a finesse or a micro jig, and then we've got a tiny hula grub, which is sort of its own animal. That's our 3 categories. It's that simple. Within that full-size jig, that's where I want you to spend the majority of your time this winter. If you're trying to build confidence, the reason why is that's where the majority of the true giants are caught. See, the beauty of a jig in the wintertime is not just that you can catch fish, it's that you can catch the biggest fish in the lake, in addition to catching a bunch of fish. A jig is a big fish producing bait. So if they will eat a full-size jig, throw it. If you've spent a bunch of time with a full-size jig and it just seems like they won't do it, then downsize. The smaller our jig gets, the more likely that the biggest fish will pass over that meal. The larger the jig, the more likely that the biggest fish will take a shot at it. That said, the smallest of jigs, the smallest hula grub, will still catch really big fish consistently compared to, you know, drop shots, Ned rigs, things like that in the wintertime. There's just something about a jig that gets those monster bites. So let's jump into the jigs. If we're talking about a full-size jig, I've got 2 jigs for you, 2 trailers. But let's focus here first, because this is the main deal. The primary jig that you'll see me throw all winter long is a Dirty Jigs finesse football jig. The finesse football, and the vast majority of the time you'll see this color. I've got 2 or 3 colors. I already told you what they are, but this is my primary. This is super matte brown. It's a brown, cinnamon, and purple. I have a ton of confidence in purple in that cold water. You guys know that. That jig is incredible. I put a Yamamoto 5-inch double tail grub on the back of that 99% of the time. I'm either throwing cinnamon purple or, you know, like a green pumpkin black flake, something like that. Just a natural trailer to pair up to that jig. The reason why, now I was very specific. I said the Yamamoto 5-inch double tail. The key to a jig in the winter is understanding that a jig in the winter and a jig in the summer are not necessarily the same thing. In the summer, we want a lot of movement, violent motion out of the trailers a lot of the time. You don't want that stuff in wintertime. Those craws are creeping around on the bottom. They're typically not shooting around, darting around. If you've got a super aggressive trailer, it really doesn't imitate what the bass are eating this time of year. So we want a very subtle, very natural trailer to go with that jig. Now, the reason why I throw that Yamamoto double tail, and I've thrown this thing since I was a little kid, is that it is the softest, most consistent double tail that I've ever found. I know that whether my water is 60 degrees because I'm further south, or my water is 36 degrees because I'm further north, either way, when I'm slow dragging this thing across the bottom, those little tails are back there just churning. They're not kicking, it's not super exaggerated, but they're just sort of creeping and churning along the bottom. There are a lot of double tails made of stiffer plastics that when you're dragging them in the coldest water, they stop moving. They get more rigid in the cold, and you end up with that just curled up shape, just dragging on the bottom. It doesn't look right at all. This double tail will continue to have those tails crawling along the bottom with just the most subtle motion. And that is such a confidence thing for me. I've lost track through the years of the numbers of giant largemouth, giant smallmouth, giant spotted bass that I've caught on a finesse football. Now, the only other full-size jig would be this guy right here, also from Dirty Jigs. This is the pitch and jig, but this is the compact pitch and jig. It has a compact hook, a smaller, lighter wire hook in it than a standard pitch and jig. The value of that Just like my finesse football versus a standard football, these smaller, lighter wire hooks allow me to go to lighter line. So we're slow fishing bottom. We're not stroking a jig. We're not ripping that thing off the bottom, snapping that rod. This is a slow game. The fish are tracking these baits. They're studying these baits. Lighter line will get you more bites. In order to have lighter line, we need a lighter wire hook. If we had a stout hook and light line, we couldn't set the hook into a big one. So by going to those lighter hooks, we're able to go to lighter line. We're able to get a better presentation and catch more fish. The other thing to consider is that in the winter time, a cold water bass does not pull as hard as a warm water bass. If you catch a fish today and you catch that same fish in July, he pulls twice as hard in July. Fish just pull harder in warm water. So we don't need super heavy line in the winter time. We can drop down without fear of getting broken off. So that compact pitch and jig, why this head? It's all about the head shape. So the football, that's my standard. That's what I throw almost all the time. I love to drag that on open bottom, sandbars, rock, chunk rock, big boulders, doesn't matter. Anything like that. But if you're on a lake that's got a lot of brush on it, that could be laid down trees, but a lot of people, you got brush piles in your lakes, right? A lot of guys like to go out and put out crappie brush piles or bass brush piles, whatever. When the fish get in that stuff, if you try and throw a football jig into a brush pile, you've got problems. They're going to snag up. But this guy, this compact pitch and jig, it can come through that brush. Now I've got a different trailer on the back of this one. This is the Demiki Air Craw, okay? Totally different profile. The Demiki Air Craw is profile, not action. So not a lot of action out of this trailer, but what we have is air in those claws. So when this jig is on the bottom, those claws just want to rise up ever so slightly off the bottom. They'll just float there just above the bottom. They're just riding up in the water. So few people realize that when a bass comes up to inspect your jig, it's one thing if they just run up and eat it. That's its own animal. But so often when a fish comes up to look at a bait, especially in cold water, they'll look at it and you'll drag it, and they'll look at it and you'll drag it, and they'll look at it. That's what I'm picturing in my mind on every cast, that there's a bass right behind my jig. Don't screw up this next pole. He's looking at it right now. That's how I stay focused. But when a bass does that, particularly a big bass, they push a wall of water, right? A big bass swimming up will push water out of its way. There's displacement there. So when your jig is laying on the bottom and a big bass comes up, that skirt will flow and it gives it secondary movement. It makes it look real. And I think that's part of why jigs catch so many giant bass. But with this air craw, with those claws up, those claws will start waving around ever so slightly too. And now you've just got all this natural movement. Every time that fish creeps on it, that craw is sitting there on the bottom just responding a little bit. I think it helps get those extra bites. Now I use the 4-inch air craw on the full size jig, but I trim it down just a little bit. I take maybe a 1/2 inch. Let me pull one out. So there's an air craw, and I cut it right about there. I take about 2/3 of the little slashed part of this, about 2/3 of that, and I just clip that off. In fact, I'll just do it to show you. Right about there. Okay? I take that much off, and that makes this jig more compact, because the farther out it sticks, those claws just start hanging out too far, they're rising up too much, and I just don't care for it. So I like to trim that bait down just a little bit. That's it for the full-size jigs. So 2 jigs, and really you probably just need one of them, right? You know whether or not you can get away with a football jig, or if you've got a bunch of junk in the water and you need an Arky style pitching head to get through that stuff. Now, that's where you should spend the majority of your time if it's working. If you're getting bit, don't downsize. Stay there, catch those fish. But if it's not working, we can go smaller. Okay, and when we go smaller, I've got a couple more options here for you. When we downsize even further, there's a couple of benefits here. We're going to a smaller jig, which will tend to get you more bites. Oh my goodness, there's fish. I'm in shallow water right now, and a fish just came up chasing despite the cold. That's crazy. Always, there are always fish moving around when we're filming. It's incredible. Back to the jig here. So the value of the jig is that the downsized jig will tend to get you more bites, but it's a much smaller hook, which allows us to go to a much lighter line, lighter rod, lighter everything, to again get more bites. Now, as the jig gets smaller, the likelihood of converting the biggest fish will start to fade a little bit. Not the numbers, it'll catch all of those, but that very biggest one, that 9-pounder that was in that school, might go, not today, right? But again, a jig in any size will do it. I had a friend when I was a kid catch a 13-pounder on a hula grub. It happens, so never discount a jig in any size. But if you need to downsize to start building that confidence, I would go here. I've got 2 jigs here that are so similar it's not even funny. And then we've got 2 different trailers. This is the Kitech tungsten football. And then this is the Beast Coast open water jig. Subtle differences between them. Slightly different hooks, slightly different keeper. Here we've got a thin weed guard. Here we have no weed guard. You know, just very, very subtle differences, but all in all, just a much smaller overall package. Now, as far as the trailer goes, I go one of 2 ways. This is one of my standard trailers. This is the Z-Man TRD Craws, okay? The value of the Craws is, 1, it floats, so it wants to sit up, much like that Air Craw. It's just a downsized profile. 2, it's made of Elastec, so that thing will stay on that jig all day long. Okay, you're not going through a bunch of plastics. Huge advantage there. But I love that overall, just downsized craw profile, and I love it right now. This time of year, leading up to Christmas, it seems like every winter, I'll have a day or 2 where I just smash with that smaller Kitech jig with that TRD Craws on there. It's amazing how well it works. The other one on that open water, I've got the X-Zone Stealth Creature on the back of that. The Stealth Creature is not a craw at all. It's a downsized creature profile, and it's got these 2 little kicking appendages back here on the back of it. And those 2 little appendages will operate much like our feet on that double tail grub. So when you're slow dragging this jig across the bottom, we've got that subtle dragging action, but in a much, much smaller profile. So again, very similar, right? We've got the compact pitch-in with an air craw. We've got that Kitech with that Z-Man. Very similar concept there with those claws floating. And then we've got that finesse football with the Yamamoto on it. And we've got that little open water Beast Coast with that X-Zone on it. But those 2 pairings are giving us something very similar, just in 2 different size profiles. Last but not least, when all else fails, if you just cannot seem to get it figured out on a jig, there's something special about a hula grub. This is the Yamamoto hula grub. The 4-inch, the 5-inch, they're excellent baits to catch fish. I think it was 2 years ago that this little tiny guy came out, the little 2.5. This dude, 2.5-inch hula grub. When it came out, I was like, oh, that'll be cool on bait finesse, right? Little tiny stuff. When I got it on the water, I went, nope, this is more than that. This thing is just plain awesome. It catches them. Last winter, I wrecked shop with this little 2.5 hula grub. What is a hula grub? It is not a jig. It is just a plastic. So it's like a double tail grub with a little formed skirt already molded to it on the top, okay? That's what a hula grub is. And then you just get a little football head, like a Great Lakes Finesse little football there, or any other shape. But again, I prefer a football. I just like the resistance. I like the way they drag on bottom, the way they puff the bottom up. I really like a football jig. And then you fish that just like you would any other jig. They get bit. Man, they get bit on days where they won't eat a standard jig. They get bit on days where they will eat a standard jig. It's amazing. They just flat out work. Now, back to that jig for a second, and we're gonna talk rods. I want to explain a couple of things for you. I just said it. I like a football because it puffs up the bottom. Here's what I meant by that. I already told you the vast majority of my winter fishing is with a football jig. A football jig on rock is really neat because it gets stuck all the time. It gets snagged all the time, but it doesn't get fully stuck very often. And what I mean is a pointed head jig, if you're pulling it through rocks, when it wedges and it is stuck and you're going to break that jig off. Whereas a football jig will hang up. When you're dragging it, a big clunky head is banging into stuff and it gets stuck a lot. You'll be pulling and all of a sudden it's banging into stuff. But when you go to pop it, you can almost always pop it and it will climb over because it never wedges in. Because of its head shape, it won't wedge into the rocks. It just sort of bangs up against them and hangs up temporarily until you pop it over. So it's awesome in rock because almost like when you're fishing a crankbait, you deflect off rock, bass like that. When I'm dragging across rocks and I'm hanging on that stuff and that jig's sort of getting moved funny ways, I think the bass respond to that too. But when there's none of that, when I'm on a muddy bottom, because a lot of times I'll get on a pattern where the fish are in what we call the guts, which would be the dead center of a cove. I see this a lot on highland reservoirs. When we see that water draw down like I have back here behind me. Now in highland reservoirs, it can be a lot more than this. It might be drawn down 40 feet on your lake. But that water draws down and the fish will sit in the gut. They'll sit right down the center of a cove. And it's usually just mud. When you pull a football jig across the bottom on mud, there's just this puffed up mud cloud coming off of that jig. And I swear it's almost like a big V wake on a buzzbait, right? Big V on the surface, the fish see the V, they see the disturbance, and then they see the buzzbait, and they come and they get it. I swear they see that puffed up mud mess, and they track it, and I've seen fish in clear water where I'm pulling the jig, and my jig is gone inside of a mud cloud, and I'll see a fish start coming, and then they disappear into the mud cloud, and then dong. It's like a magnet to them. It just, again, I have all the confidence in the world in fishing a football jig this time of year. Now your rod matters, and I have a handful of rods that I'm super confident in. And this is not a budget friendly combo whatsoever, but this is the best football jig rod that I've found. This is from G. Loomis. It's an NRX Plus. It's the 844C MBR. 844. That rod is listed as a heavy, but the MBRs are mag bass rods. That's what MBR stands for, mag bass rod. They have a very unique taper through the blank. So while it may seem to be a heavy, that may be what they call it, it is actually extremely soft through the whole mid of that rod. And when I load up on a fish with a finesse football, they're done. I have got them. I know that I've got them. I've got a metanium on that. And then of course, braid to a leader. That's how I like to fish a football in winter. I love braid to a leader. I feel like I'm more connected when those fish come up. Most of them smoke it, but some days they're just acting weird and they'll just come up and grab it and it'll just get a little heavier. I can detect that sooner with braid. So I like to go braid to a leader. Now for those smaller jigs, like that Kitech jig or that Beast Coast jig, I drop down. I don't need as much rod at all. So I typically drop down. This is a Zodius 610 medium heavy, much smaller rod, but it's got, whoa, did you see that? It's got a whole bunch of backbone to it. And I'm just super confident in that setup. I've got a Corrado 70 on there, again, braid to a leader. And in the video description, I'm gonna link you the rods, the reels, the baits, the trailers. I will give you the exact weight of the heads. Like, I like to throw a heavier 1/2 ounce to 5/8 jig until I go down to the little guys. Then I go 3/8 to 1/2 ounce. I throw very heavy with the jig. I want to be connected to that thing at all times. That's what I want going on. I don't want to be guessing what's happening down there. I want to be feeling what's happening down there. But I'll link all of that stuff in the video description for you, right down to the pound leader that I throw. Typically 12 to 14, 12 to 15 pound on my full size jigs, 8 to 12 pound on those small little guys, and then I'll go even lighter, 8 to 10 pound on that little hula grub. And then I've got a budget option for you as well. This is the Dobyns Fury 734. That is a 7'3" 4 power rod. Again, excellent flex throughout. I like jig rods that load deep in the midsection of the rods because it helps keep fish pinned. Again, I'm throwing those heavier jigs, right? 3/8, 1/2, 5/8. Those heavier jigs, if a fish comes up and jumps, it's pretty easy for him to throw them on the wrong rod. But when you have a rod that loads deep, it'll keep those fish pinned. It does not matter. So that Fury 734, it can throw every single jig we've talked about today. Those full-size jigs, hit them hard. Those smaller jigs, just load up on them. But it can do all of that. I've got a Max 5 Pro on there by Abu Garcia. I've been super impressed with that. As a budget-friendly reel, it just does an excellent job. Guys, no matter what your budget, no matter where you fish, a jig should be a major part of your winter arsenal. It is one of the only slow techniques that I do all winter. I like to power fish as much as possible, but a jig catches so many giants that I take the time and I slow down and I fish it, even in the coldest water. It's just one of those baits that you can count on to catch a monster bass. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.